Let's focus on our database type now. Just get it to a really basic point where we can at least have the accounting for the Genesis addresses. That would be kind of cool. Maybe we can lay in a couple of endpoints to be able to see the Genesis information and see the current accounts. If we could get all that sort of done, we're on a great roll to be able to continue to add support to the block, right? Like I need that at least to start. So let's see if we can get that in. All right. So I'm going to go back here, and what I kind of want to do is bring in the database type. But I'm going to clean up. Like we don't have any sort of block information yet in storage. I do got the rewrite mutex probably for the accounts. We've got the Genesis. So like this is the beginning of our database, right, for the entire blockchain. We've got the Genesis information, and we're going to have accounts. For at least right now it's in Genesis. We're going to make sure that works. All right, so with that in mind, I'm going to look at our factory function here. And I think you're going to see a couple interesting things here in the factory function, at least for what we need right now. I've got a Genesis. I need the Genesis, and then I'm asking for an event handler. That's because in the foundation layer we don't allow logging. And this will allow us to do any logging that we're going to need. So the caller will have to give us a function. You can see that I'm using basically the fump.printf sort of signature there. And then we'll return a database. So that's kind of cool. So let's do that. We'll construct our database here. Don't have anything around storage yet. We'll get there. That's kind of cool. We make our accounting database, right? It starts out empty. And now this is kind of cool, right? This is really what I wanted to begin with. I want to read the balances out of the Genesis information. That would be my address and say Pavel's address. Take that account string out of the, what do we got here? It's a map, so it's key value, where the key is the address. We can convert that to an address. Remember the Genesis file real quick, zblock Genesis. We're reading this map, right, which is address and balance. So account string, right, it's really the account ID string. There it is. So we convert it. We have no problems converting it. It's of the proper form. Then we can construct that new account, assigning it to our database with that balance. So our balances will be set at the startup, at least with the origin accounts. We don't have any blocks yet. So for our purposes, I mean, that's kind of it. I mean, just having that alone is really, really cool. We have now the ability to, now this event handler we're not using right now. Probably that gets passed into something else. So I'm going to get rid of it until we need it. And at this point, I know that because we're not storing it, right? We're not storing it. So there's our new right there, and we've got accounting. Now, let's go look at just the method set that we need right now just for the accounting side. I'm sure there's some stuff here. And here's one method that is kind of cool. It gives us the ability to remove an account from the accounting database. I don't know if we're using that. It will be interesting to see that later, but at least we've got an API around the accounting. So the idea is the database API manages everything, right? And so we've got that. Now we're using the lock there. Query. Okay, so query retrieves the accounting database. So notice something that I'm doing here. We are looking up an account in the accounting database, and then we're returning a copy. So this is where the value semantics come in really nicely. That way the caller gets their own value and they can do whatever they want. It doesn't affect our state. Again, we're keeping value semantics in the map anyway. And then we're using the read lock. So here we're able to query an account and get their balance. I'm sure we're going to need that for our handlers. Something that I like to do a lot of times because it helps with some of the multi-threading issues. Again, it also will depend on how big this accounting database gets. We've got a small system, but this idea of a copy. So what copy does is it will make a shallow copy, but a copy nonetheless of the entire accounting database. Again, that could be like way too big of a thing to do, so you may want to just look things up. But this way, if you have your own copy, you don't necessarily, we're not maintaining locks, let's say write locks to block on operations. So kind of interesting. It'd be interesting to see where we're using that. Okay. Other things here I don't think we need just yet. I think that's what we're going to keep. Great. Okay. So for our purposes now, we've got the ability here to, what are we doing here? I'm able to load the Genesis accounts up at least, remove an account from there, query an account. We can even do the full copy of accounting. That's kind of cool. I think this might be enough to kind of get going, just to be able to see kind of what's happening here with our database. Okay, so with this in place, it would be nice to now maybe bring up our database stuff here. I'm curious, however, if that's how we really do it. I don't think that's how we do it in the main project. So I'm going to do something here while I've got you. I'm going to go to services node main.go. And what I do see here is that we're loading the Genesis, but there's another package called state that is really managing the entire state of the blockchain. So I want to look at that and bring that in as well as I look at this here. We've got this blockchain support. I also want to look at any configuration that we might need. And right now I don't see anything that we're really ready to do yet. So I'm going to do the following. I'm going to go back here under blockchain, actually in our project, sorry. And I'm going to add our full, this idea of state came from Ethereum. They have this state package as well. And so I really started this work with the understanding of state, and then I broke everything down into the different sort of parts of state that we would need to maintain for our blockchain. You can see there's a lot of stuff in here that eventually we're going to get to. But I'd like to maybe bring something up and get a sense. So let me also, this is kind of cool. I leave the notes for other things that I want to do in the state.go file and a comment at the top. I love this. I think it works really well for you to kind of have a list of things that you need to do. I'm really looking at this right now. I'm trying to get a sense of what we're doing here with state and how that database type is used. So you can see here that the state does maintain a database, doesn't it? Right there. And it also maintains Genesis, doesn't it? So, you know, what we could do as a starting point is bring in our Genesis here. And think of state as managing everything and, you know, trying to maintain a full API. So anything that we have to do on the blockchain, we do it through our state API, not our database API, or we'll do everything through our state API and centralize everything. So it's really it controls and manages everything. All right, that's kind of cool for now. That's what we need. You can see also that I had a config type. We could steal that config type. I always use value semantics for the config type. And again, all I need right now is the Genesis information. There we go. Nice. So we're gonna, it looks like we'll construct that database in the state. So let's walk through that. And not surprising, the very first thing that we do is construct a new database. Now, our database currently only wants the Genesis information, so I love that. There it is. And now we've got the database to maintain the accounting and all that good stuff. And then it looks like what we can do is construct our state. I'm going to get rid of a lot here, right? We only need this information right now, our Genesis and our DB. And then I think we could just return that. Perfect. So if you notice now what we've done here is we've got our database package. It's managing the accounting database. It contains all the types that we need for dealing with transactions, eventually for blocks. But our state is our main API. Everything that we do is going to be off of state here. So with that in place, let me go back to our services node main. And I know right now we don't need any. Let's go back to our main. I don't need any configuration at this point from what I can tell. So I'm going to go in to the blockchain support. And I'm going to add this section into our main. Main is where everything happens. So right here, before we load any debug endpoints like you learned in Ultimate Service, what we need to do here is load our Genesis. This is what we've got so far. So I'm going to load the Genesis up. That gives us our Genesis information. It knows how to read that off that Z block, right? I've hard-coded that. And then we've got the construction of our state. Again, there's not much to the config just yet. We need Genesis. I think that's it, to be honest with you. That's all we have right now. It constructs the database underneath. I don't have any sort of shutdown yet. And then the idea is that we're going to be passing this state over to our public MUX APIs. This is how we're going to get it. Again, this is more Ultimate Service stuff that's already in place. But the idea here is that we want to pass our state into where our MUX is going to be. So I'm going to go into our MUX here. I'm going to see our MUX config. Right? Even if I go into our MUX config here, I see the state that we need right now. Beautiful. Oops, there it is, state. But now that we have it here, we're going to need to pass it into the actual router, or really where we bind our routes. So that's where this public thing is here. I'm going to do that. And now I'm going to have to come into there. Again, there's the config. If I follow that along, what's great is everything starts from main. So the config is here. And this is where we load our routes. So the idea now is we've constructed state in main. All right, we've constructed state in main. Here's main. We've constructed state. We've loaded our Genesis. We construct our state API for the blockchain. And then we pass that to the public MUX handlers. The job of this is to really load the routes, which is here under V1. And now what we'll have access to is the state API. And the real reason I wanted to do all that, let me close all this for now, is if I go under public, which are going to be the endpoints for the end user, all right, and I go into our public.go, okay, you can see here I have this sample endpoint that we tested from the beginning. So I'm going to go ahead and, oops, add state now to the receiver. So all these handlers that we're going to write, all these handlers here that we write, at least on the public side, will have access to the state API. This is how we do it. Construct it, we pass it where it needs to be. Now, there's two endpoints that I would love to get working. Let me go back to V1 here. These two would be really nice. In fact, these three could be nice since they're accounting based. So let me grab those. And really, at that point, we don't need the sample anymore. So it would be nice to implement this endpoint where we can get back the Genesis information and display it back on a curl, or all the accounts, or a specific account. So we need these sort of handlers now that we have access to the state API. OK, great. So let's go now into public. And let's see if we can find our Genesis. Make sure that works. You know what I'm going to do? Since it's not happening for me really quick, I'm just going to go to, nice. So here it is. OK, so in public.go, the idea of public.go is that's where all of our sort of public APIs are. And then private is going to be where all the node-to-node communication happens. OK, so you can see here that we want to get the Genesis information out of the state. And I didn't add this Genesis API in our state package. Again, I'm trying to protect all that state. So we go back to our state. All right, I am sure we're going to see there it is, Genesis API. OK, great. So there it is. So what Genesis does is it returns a copy of the Genesis information. Again, if we return copies, it will be better from a multi-threaded standpoint. I try to do that as much as I can. So with that now in mind, I go to public, there it is. So we now have this endpoint. We can even just test it before we put the other ones in. We should be able to get Genesis information out of our system. So I'm going to do this. Boom, I'm going to hide those for a second. And we've got Genesis list in place. I'm going to go also into my make file here, and we're going to do some cool things here. There's the node v1 sample 88. There it is. So let me go back to v1 and Genesis list, which will be under, should be under v1. So, wow, there it is. So that endpoint should work when I bring the system up now. We should be able to bring the system up and get the Genesis list, right? Because in main, I went ahead and I constructed our state. I loaded our Genesis, constructed our state. In our state package, we went in and we constructed a database based on the Genesis. I should do the accounting. We save that. We're starting to build an API out of state here. Beautiful. Then we took that state and we got it all the way up to our public handlers. Okay. And now we've got our Genesis handler, and in v1 I'm binding that. So we're going to do a couple things here now to kind of test this. We can use this make up command to bring our node up, and then we can try this curl command. So I'm going to split the pane horizontally. I'm going to make sure both windows are in our, in our project. There it is. Okay. I'm going to do make up, and hopefully this starts without any issue. Okay, it did. I'm going to make this a little smaller. All right, so it started. Our router's up and our node is up and going. We are listening on port 8080. So I should be able to run this curl command. I'm going to make this a little tighter there. Oh, how cool is that? We now have the ability to hit our node and ask for the Genesis information, and we got that Genesis information back. Look at that. How sweet. How sweet is that? So we now have the Genesis information coming out of that. Now, it would be nice to know if the accounting worked. In other words, remember that when we construct our database, when the state now calls new, we go through the Genesis to construct that accounting database. And so it would be nice now to see what that looks like. So I'm going to bring that in. I'm going to bring that in here. And I'm going to go to v1, and I'm going to go find the accounts handler. There it is. And I'm going to bring this handler in. This class isn't really about the handlers, so we'll just walk through it quickly. I can even bring in this since it uses the same handler. See the colon here? So we're going to get that data out of our little web framework here. Okay, let's look at our handler now for accounts. So it pulls that account ID if it exists there. And then what it does is it constructs this, it defines this accounts map right there, database.accounts, database. Okay, let's see that. If we did not specify a specific account, then here we're asking for a copy of all the accounts from our state API, which we don't have, right? We don't have that yet. So let's bring in that call. Okay, great. So we go to state. State's always going to be the main API. And what it does is it asks the DB, the database, for a copy of all the accounts. Remember, we added that. So we're going to get back those accounts. And then at that point, we'll operate on our own copy. So we're not causing any locks to be maintained. Nobody should be really doing this, right? Because if the counts got really large and we'd want to handle paging, I'm not doing paging here, that's fine. If we do ask for a specific account, we do our 2 to validate it, and then we use that query account API. Again, that's just going to leverage, that will just leverage something we've already implemented in DB. Let's see if I can find it quickly. If not, there's no reason to be searching that way. I'll just say find it for me. And there it is. And not surprising. Now there I have it in query.go, but I'm just going to keep it in state. I try to organize that stuff as this thing grew. And again, not surprising, we're using the DB API, we're just fronting it. You might say, Bill, why can't we just use the DB API? Because I got a bunch of package APIs here, and I don't want to be scattering them all over the code base. So we centralized everything related to blockchain and blockchain APIs here in state. And now you can do a query against one particular account. How cool is that? And we add that then to the accounts here. So either you're just going to have one or you're going to have them all. Now, if you do see here, we did add our own model so we could format the account information the way we wanted to. So under public here, I'm going to add a models.go. You're going to see us doing this for lots of things that we want to put out there. And then this is how we're going to display the information back to the user. We're not going to use the blockchain types here necessarily, right? We're going to use this. And we're going to give us that information. So we're detaching ourselves from any blockchain types. We use those models. OK, there's also this account info. There it is right there. So I'm going to add that to our models as well. And so we've got the account, and then we've got account information. Now, we don't have anything like this uncommitted. Like, none of that really exists yet. So we'll look at how we're using account. We do have accounts, and we do have a specific account. So right now, account info will just be the collection of accounts based on us formatting it that way. All right? And since I don't have any of this, we get rid of it. Don't have any of this, we get rid of it. So there it is, right? I love these models up here. We detach ourselves from the blockchain types, at least from an output, so we don't break, say, front ends. And we now have an accounts API that will let us do some querying. So let me go back into our make file. OK. And I go back to our V1, and this is going to be accounts list. OK, accounts list. So that should work. And then I should also be able to, knowing that this account exists, which is mine, I'll put that here. And then I should also be able to say accounts list mine, if all this is working. All right, so we're going to have to restart our node. I'm going to start it back up. Nice. I'm going to try our curl for the accounts list. Oh, look at that. I mean, we got a node that's starting to work here. We've got an accounting database based on the Genesis information, right? We know that there have been no transactions so far for these accounts. We don't have a name. We'll add some name. We added our own little sort of name server. We'll do that later because it's easier to look at names than addresses. But there it is. And then I can also try this. And I can just get back the one account. How cool is that? So we've got essentially the beginnings of our database management in place. We've got an accounting system, at least in place for the Genesis. So we can bring up our server, read the Genesis, build the accounts with their balances. And we even have some endpoints that will let us see what those balances are at any time. So we're in like really, really great shape here. So really what's going to be next is to start thinking about our cryptographic audit trails again now within the scope of this database and how we want to start to begin to manage maybe some of those things.